All right, welcome back to ABA exam review and the continuation of our BCBA practice question series, where we're going through another set of questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. Check out behavioranalyststudy.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack. When you pass your exam, please let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's keep going. The behavior is measured using continuous measurement. Measurement accurately reveals the behavior occurred 55% of the time. The same behavior is measured using partial and then whole interval measurement, which showed the behavior occurred for 30% of the time and 70% of the time, respectively. What can we say for sure about the interval measurements? So let's think about this question. It's kind of a combination continuous question and interval question, but we're really focused on the interval piece of this. What we know so far is the measurement, continuous measurement, accurately showed the behavior occurred 55% of the time. So we know that's accurate. We know the behavior occurred 55%. When we use partial and whole interval, we got 30% and then 70%. So what can we say about those numbers? Well, those numbers are inaccurate because the accurate number is 55%. And so if we look at 30%, that's going to be less than our 55, and 70% is going to be more. So what can we say so far? What do we know about the interval measurements? A, they are more accurate than the continuous measurement procedure. Well, we can't say that for sure, right? Because in this case, continuous measurement was more accurate. And as a general rule of thumb, continuous measurement is typically going to be more accurate than discontinuous. B, the whole interval measurement is more accurate. Again, not the case. What we have here is that the continuous measurement accurately said 55% of the time, whole interval said 70. C, discontinuous measurement, like interval recording, should now be avoided. Well, not necessarily. We have one data point here, which is 55%. And so we don't want to make sweeping generalizations and hard and fast rules based on small subsets of data. Discontinuous measurement might not have been the most accurate or the best way to measure here, but it doesn't mean we need to get rid of it altogether. And so with D, interval recording is underestimating and overestimating the behavior. That's what we're getting. With our partial, we said it happened 30% of the time. So we're underestimating that behavior. 70% of the time for whole, overestimated the behavior. So the only thing we know for sure, based on the data and information given, is that interval recording is underestimating and overestimating the behavior. And we're talking specifically about this question. Patrick gets home from work and discovers that all of the food in his fridge is completely frozen. Patrick says, the refrigerator must be broken, I think. The I think is considered what? Basic verbal operant question. We are looking at I think in this phrase. So Patrick, what does he do? Gets home, sees his refrigerator is broken, and he says, refrigerator must be broken. So essentially, Patrick is tacting the broken fridge. But then he adds, I think. So what is the I think doing? Well, the I think is modifying the primary operant. And what do we call it when we modify our primary operant? A self-tact. Self-tact is not in the literature, and Patrick, regardless, isn't tacting himself. He's tacting the broken fridge. B, an autoclitic. Yes, the autoclitic is modifying Patrick's primary operant, more or less. So the I think is what we would consider an autoclitic. It is not an intraverbal. Why is it not an intraverbal? Well, it's part of this bigger operant, for one. Two, and the intraverbal is evoked by what? Well, it's evoked by another verbal SD. And neither of these were evoked by a verbal SD. It can't be an intraverbal. And then D, an operant modifier. It's not what we would call this, right? So you've got to be careful with A and D, which sound pretty good, but if you're fluent, you know those aren't even choices. It's a good example of how fluency can help you in so many ways. When you lack fluency and you get to a question you may be unsure about, you might see answer choices that, because you don't know the definition for that term, it might look more appealing. And that's a bad place to be. So fluency is going to help you avoid picking things like self-tact. In this case, the I think is an autoclitic, which is modifying the refrigerator must be broken. An aspiring chef just started working at a steakhouse downtown. He was assigned to the appetizer station to start. During training, his trainer is observing him make and plate a crab cake step by step. At one point, the trainer says, "Too slow, try again," and makes the aspiring chef start the crab cake over. What is described here? So we have a chaining question, and specifically the question is asking about what is described, more or less what kind of chaining strategy are we using? What do we know? We know the chef just started working. He's on the appetizer station. During training, he's making and plating a crab cake step by step. So this is our chain, right? Make and plate a crab cake. Whatever the steps are, whatever the task analysis was, those are the steps the chef has to do. But at one point, the trainer says, "Too slow, try again." And this is where our answer comes into play. Why and in what strategy would you ever stop the chain because the learner was too slow? Well, if we look at A and B, forward and backward chaining, we're not going to stop those because they're too slow. Because remember, with forward and backward, we're teaching individual steps, right? Forward chaining, we're teaching the first steps first, and backward, we're teaching the last steps first, but we're teaching individual steps one at a time. It's not about speed, it's about them getting it correct. If you look at C, though, a behavior chain with a limited hold, that's more similar to what we're looking at here, where for certain steps, you have a limited amount of time to complete those steps. If you don't, then the chain is ruined. In this case, whatever step he was on, the chef, he went too slow. He did not meet the limited hold. So the trainer said, "Well, too slow. We've got to try again." Don't get it confused with the behavior chain interruption strategy. The behavior chain interruption strategy is a very specific strategy where you are intentionally interrupting a chain at one point or another. And it's a chain that's already been mastered for the most part. So the essential steps have been mastered. And when you interrupt that chain, you're trying to evoke new behavior. What's happening here is the speed wasn't right, or the magnitude, if you want to look at it that way. And so because the chef did not meet the limited hold, the trainer said, "That's too slow. We have to try again." Marcia tells her technicians that they should deliver punishment immediately following any attempts by the client to hurt someone. Yesterday, the technician punished the client for throwing a paper airplane at their brother. Marcia then says that was not an appropriate behavior to punish. What is the issue here? So, what is happening? Well, we've got Marcia, because we're looking at an issue question. So we have Marcia, who tells the technicians, deliver punishment. And as always, punishment, there are ethical concerns. Specifically, Marcia says, deliver punishment following attempts by the client to hurt someone. Now, immediately as an analyst, you should start thinking, all right, what does an attempt to hurt someone look like specifically? Because if we're going to punish, we need to be very precise about our punishment. And so yesterday, the client punished the client for throwing a paper airplane. Marcia then says that's not appropriate to punish that behavior. Well, what was wrong? Was it the technician's fault? Or is there something else at play? Well, if you think about attempt to hurt someone, what does that mean? Because if you've worked in schools or clinical settings or around children and observed other people respond to behavior, you're going to, or you're going to learn that what people consider aggressive or hurtful can be very different. And so that's an issue here. And that's what happened. The client threw a paper airplane. And so the technician said, well, I don't know. Maybe they're trying to hurt them. Let's punish. So what's the problem? A, the technician does not understand punishment. Well, we don't know that for sure. The technician did what they were told. Punish the client when they try to hurt someone. The technician interpreted hurt someone as throwing a paper airplane. So be it, right? That's why we have to have very good definitions for this specific reason. B, punishment is poorly defined. Is it punishment that's poorly defined, or is it the behavior? What's behavior? We don't know what the punishment is. We do know the behavior, however, is not very well defined. C, the technician is not qualified to work with this client. Again, nothing says or shows the technician did anything wrong other than Marcia saying, well, that wasn't appropriate. So since she's saying, well, that's not an appropriate behavior, We're talking about the definition here. And so the behavior is very poorly defined. This is, if nothing else, a very important reason where your definitions need to be specific. You need non-examples, and you need definitions where whoever reads that definition, they know exactly what that behavior is. Because now we're delivering punishment for simply throwing a paper airplane when the analyst is saying, well, that's not appropriate. That's a big problem. The issue here is the behavior is poorly defined. A nanny is exhausted because she did not sleep well last night. Today, when she arrives at the child's house that she nannies for, she puts on the television immediately as soon as the child starts to ask for things. If the child stops asking for things, the nanny's behavior will likely be influenced by what? So, what is the nanny getting out of this? Because we're looking at the nanny's behavior. The nanny is exhausted. She didn't sleep well. She arrived at the child's house she nannies for. And when the child asks for things, what does she do? Puts the television on. And what happens? The child stops asking for things. So the antecedent, child asks for things. Response, television goes on. Consequence, nanny escapes. Child asking for things. When you escape, what is that associated with? Well, that's associated with negative reinforcement. Now, we know that we look at the future occurrence of the behavior to determine the effect. We don't know how the nanny's behavior changed in the future, so we're going to have to make our best assumption, and I use that word with hesitation because I always tell you don't assume. This is one of those cases where you're going to have to assume, right? Because we don't know how the nanny's behavior was affected, but we've got to pick a consequence. What we know, though, is the nanny escaped the child asking for things. And so when you escape, what is that associated with? Well, that's associated with negative reinforcement. So the nanny's behavior is likely going to be influenced by negative reinforcement. It's unlikely she'll be punished because she tried to get the child to stop asking for things. And it wasn't positive because she escaped. So again, I try not to say assumption because I always tell you don't assume anything. This is one of the very rare cases where you might have to. But even then, you're not really assuming. Because if you know the nanny's trying to escape the child asking, and the child does stop asking, and the nanny does escape, then you can more willingly pick negative reinforcement since negative reinforcement is associated with escape.